What is up, all of my beautiful freaking people? Welcome back to another episode of FML Talk. Today, we are diving in to trauma, betrayal, and how to recover from it all. So sit back, grab a drink, maybe your self-love journal, and welcome to FML Talk.
Oh my God. Wait, how old was the other girl?
19. Can you believe that shit?
Hey, this is Gabrielle Stone.
Good book?
Have you gotten to chapter 6 yet? He did what? 48 hours?
What a dick.
Yeah, but have you seen all the photos on her Instagram?
And this is FML Talk.
Oh, no, she didn't.
Y'all know I love a good self-love cocktail and occasionally an actual cocktail. I have always notoriously hated the taste of alcohol and needed it disguised in a good mixology cocktail until I discovered Neft. Because Neft is a premium vodka in its purest form with non-GMO rye, it has a light taste full of character. Not only is Neft one of the best tasting vodkas I've ever had, it also comes in the cutest packaging I have ever seen. Their unbreakable barrel keeps it chilled for up to 6 hours, making it the perfect drink to take just about anywhere. Join me in adding a little actual cocktail into your self-love cocktail with Neft vodka. Cheers! So I want to preface this with a trigger warning. We are going to be talking a lot about abuse, mental, emotional, financial, some physical, trauma recovery, and we dig into all the topics. So I want to forewarn everybody that there is a trigger warning on this episode. I am going to be joined by Jane, just Jane. She uses a pseudonym, and she's one of the amazing women at Betrayal Trauma Recovery. They are an organization, they do a podcast, they have online content, and an incredible support group and community for people recovering from abuse. I cannot wait for you guys to hear this episode and all of the insight that Jane has to share with us. So let's dive right in. Jane, welcome to FML Talk. I am so thrilled to have you here. How are you?
Great. So happy to be here.
I cannot wait to dive into all this stuff. All of the content you put out is really, really powerful. So can you kind of give us a little bit of just background on yourself of how you came to really doing this type of work?
Yeah, 100%. So my career has just been in writing. But then when I came to like my own personal, everyone has that moment when you realize I am being abused, and it's just this powerful, all-encompassing situation. And I feel like a lot of survivors of domestic abuse or infidelity or, and at BTR, we consider infidelity severe emotional abuse, realize, I can either just bury this or I can talk about it. And for me, writing is how I get my voice out there. And so I started writing for BTR, and then it's kind of moved into more content creation of, different mediums. So video, podcasts, interviews, things like that. So that's how we kind of got here. And I'm so passionate about it. So many women are suffering so much, but aren't quite sure what's happening. And I think that's kind of the nature of this kind of really covert abuse that's happening all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. Like right off the bat, I was like ready to go into, some of the topics we're going to discuss, but you said something that pulled me, that you consider infidelity to be severe emotional abuse. Can you kind of expand on that a little bit? Because that's shockingly enough, even though I've been through it, the first time I've heard it put that way.
Yeah. So, when you enter into a long-term relationship, whether it's marriage or just a partnership, there's this, honestly, like, an explicit, usually you make promises, whether they're over the altar or a legal agreement, if it's just like a courthouse, you make promises of fidelity if it's a monogamous partnership, right? And so it's a legal contract, like you're with me, I'm with you, and fidelity is expected. And so when one partner decides to suddenly change the rules and pull the rug out from the other person, what's happened is taking away a partner's ability to trust without their consent. That is going to cause severe emotional damage. And outside of a marriage context, if a friend were to do that, if you had a best friend and all of a sudden that friend does something to severely break your trust, we would all call that emotional abuse. But for some reason, when it's in a marriage, everyone wants to blame the victim. Like, well, what did you do? You weren't meeting your partner's needs. You weren't doing enough. So let's see both sides of the story. When in reality, there was an agreement there. If that person wasn't happy, it was their job to say, I want to do this differently. I want to change what was originally agreed upon because, I'm not blank, whatever it is. And so, what happens is we call it betrayal trauma, because these victims end up, a lot of times, there's so much that happens in infidelity. There's lying, there's gaslighting, there's financial abuse, because affairs are expensive, and so this victim has suffered all of these abuses, but then the victim, I'm going to say she, because a lot of, this is probably a female audience, and a lot of
yes,
BTR, a lot of them identify as women. So, she has this situation where everyone, clergy, if she's religious, therapists, friends, are all saying, well, what haven't you done? What haven't you given? And you wouldn't say that to someone in a friendship or in a business situation.
Right.
You would be like, oh my gosh, cut this person out of your life. I'm so sorry this happened to you. Right. And so it's like this, the initial trauma of being betrayed by the one person that you should always be able to count on. And then secondary trauma of everyone that should be supporting you blaming you.
Yeah. Oh my God. It makes so much sense. And when I went through my marriage and the infidelity and the divorce, it was never explained to me like that. No one in my life ever asked, what did you do? There was never any victim blaming, but I've gotten that a lot on my viral videos on TikTok. All the triggered men like to be like, well, you must have not been sucking dick enough, or maybe you guys weren't having sex enough, or maybe you weren't making him enough sandwiches, like ridiculous stuff that like people like to chirp off about on TikTok. But do people ever push back on saying like, well, that's not real abuse?
Yeah, all the time. Yeah, I think that's my number one like hate message that I get is stop making a mountain out of a molehill. You are hurting real victims by calling all of this abuse. I get that all the time. And what's frustrating to me is that what that does is it puts victims of emotional and psychological abuse in a place where they're not going to reach out for help until they're being battered, because they feel like they can't leave a relation. A lot of women feel like they can't leave a relationship unless they've been cheated on, serial cheated on, many, many times. They're left by their partner, or they're being hit, and so to change that narrative from abuse isn't only being beaten or punched in the face, abuse is being emotionally harmed or physically harmed or sexually harmed or whatever, when a person is aware that they're doing it, and cheating 100% falls under that umbrella, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so when people say things like, well, what you're doing is you're taking away attention from real victims. No, we're just widening the umbrella so that it encompasses all victims, so that all women know, you're being abused. And when you're being abused, you need to get to safety right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did an episode in our previous season with a really good friend of mine, Carly Craig. It was a 2-part episode because there was so much to dig into, where she wasn't married, but she was with her partner for 4+ years, and they were living together, and he was completely like had another relationship going on the side and was having like unprotected sex with this other person, and was still, lying to her, gaslighting her, to the point where now, she's had to recover from all of this once it finally all came to light. And she's like, I don't even trust people when they tell me they're going to the grocery store anymore. Like, the psychological abuse that I've had to undo on my brain and the trauma that I've had to undo on my brain is a very real thing. And so many people were looking at her right when it happened, before she came forward with the whole story, and they were like, it's just a breakup. Like, why are you so fucked up about it? And she's like, no, it's not just a breakup. Like, I was in a narcissistic, abusive relationship, and this person damaged my brain. And it's a very real thing. And I feel like it doesn't necessarily, no, not necessarily, that's the wrong word. It doesn't take away from any other type of abuse that people experience, but it's definitely needs to be recognized as a form of it. So I'm so glad that you guys are doing that work over there to widen that scope.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. So many times we get comments from women who say things like, I don't know if it's abuse, or messages or whatever, where they're like, I don't know if I'm being abused. I just know that I feel crazy. And if you dig a little bit, you'll often find that there is a lot of sexual coercion happening. A lot of pushing and pushing and pushing for her to have sex, or her feeling like she, like she needs to in order to keep her husband or her partner faithful, which is abusive. I mean, having sex without giving consent, that is sexual coercion,
Yeah. And I think too, it's not even like having sex without giving consent. It's having sex when you're pressured into it to the point where you're just like, fuck, fine, okay, because it's like gonna be easier if I just do it. I went through that a lot in my marriage. It was always like, we're not having enough sex. We're not having enough sex. I want sex this way. I want more this. And I didn't realize until I got into my current relationship that there was so much trauma around that I didn't realize that I had to undo. Like I would go up to my current partner and be like, okay, should we go have sex? We haven't had sex in 3 days. And he was like, no, we're fine. Like what? But I was so conditioned into being like, he needs it, X amount of times, or he's going to cheat, or he's going to leave me. And it made me enjoy sex a lot less, and I kind of had to rediscover what it meant to like have pleasurable sex that was not under a pressured situation.
Yeah. I mean, there's this big movement to redefine consent as an enthusiastic, ongoing yes, that's continuously given throughout the experience. And I think that's really powerful. And it's interesting because there's just to see how ingrained the misogyny is in our community, in our society. Men just, they push back on that constantly, and it's like, it's so ridiculous. It's like, what's so wrong with a woman being given a voice? So like you said, you get these comments, it just makes me sick. What didn't you do? What didn't you give? And when we talk about abuse on like TikTok or Instagram or whatever, we will get comments like that are like, well, she deserved it because, or you deserved it, or women who are commenting on this deserve it because they're not doing enough blank. And whether it's about sexual coercion or about physical abuse or about gaslighting or emotional abuse, it's crazy. I'm like, it's these scripts are so ingrained, and these men aren't willing to challenge that at all because they feel entitled to women's bodies sexually, but in every other way too. And it's kind of scary, but I do feel like women are becoming more empowered to say no. And I like that your partner is like, your new relationship is changing that for you,
Yeah, I think more and more men are starting to get on board with that kind of movement, because there are so many good men in the world. Like we just, seem to attract, especially with the content that you and I talk about, we attract the shitty ones.
Yeah, I know the algorithm
come out of the woodwork.
I know. I'm like, why does the algorithm always find the jerk?
Right.
Like I want to find the nice
It's like,
ones.
It'll like push people to either the great pages that people are going to really like connect and follow and like make it go viral, and all of the assholes that will be triggered by it. Like there's no in between.
Yeah, I know. It's so funny. I'm like, this is definitely giving me like more trust issues, but that's another subject.
So we've talked a lot about narcissists and gaslighting on this show, but not for quite a while. So can you give me a kind of rundown for people that are newer to how to kind of look for gaslighting and what really that is and what it looks like?
Sure. So, gaslighting has been one of those terms that just keeps coming up. A lot of people talk about like the government gaslighting us, or, the celebrity is gaslighting everyone. And it's hard to understand what that actually means. A lot of times people say the intent of gaslighting is to make you feel crazy. And that's not exactly correct. The intent of gaslighting is to avoid accountability. And if making you feel crazy helps, good. They don't care. That's kind of like collateral damage in the process. But it's an abuser avoiding accountability at whatever cost that means. So a conversation where you're being gaslit, a very common one is an abuser says something, you repeat back what they said to them, and they say, I never said that. And so you are going to feel crazy in that moment, especially if you've had a long relationship with this person and trust has been established, and you're like, what's going on? Did I really hear that wrong? What's going on here? So you are going to feel crazy, but what they're doing is they're avoiding accountability at your expense. Does that make sense? And so, a lot of times I feel like women are like, I don't know if I'm being gaslit because I don't think he wants me to feel crazy. It doesn't matter how he feels about your emotions. It matters that he's covering his own tracks.
Right.
Yeah. And so it's not just lying, because narcissists will lie about, they like it. I don't know if they can, who knows if they can even help themselves. They'll lie about everything, but it's a lie told to avoid being accountable for something that they did that they usually know would have hurt you. And so, ways to know that you're being gaslit, like the first one is very simple. If you feel crazy, if you question, am I crazy? I feel crazy. If you're calling your friend or your sister and you're like, am I crazy? You're probably being gaslit. Just, if you find yourself talking in circles with this person, if you're like, I really have a distinct memory of this, but now I'm feeling like, and they're able to kind of talk you out of it, you're probably being gaslit. We have on our TikTok, I have so many, it's like a full 60 seconds of gaslighting phrases. That never happened.
Oh, nice.
You're just like your mom. They'll bring up things like, just out of the blue, like your family's history of mental illness, or the fact that your mom's pretty forgetful. And it's like planting these little seeds of like, your memory really isn't that reliable, or you're really not that smart.
Right.
And what that does, like, even if there's no incident attached to it, but what it does is it kind of takes away from your own ability to have credibility in yourself, so that when an incident does come up, if you find if his phone dings and you happen to look over and it's a text from some girl you don't know, and you're like, well, that you'll doubt yourself before you question him.
Yeah. Okay. So for example, for everybody, because everybody that's listening to this has read my book, so they know my story. When I found my ex-husband's phone in a sock drawer, picked it up, and a contact lit up, like a message from someone that had a girl's name in it with a heart in the contact name. And I looked at him and was like, what is this? And he came over, snatched the phone out of my hand, walked into our bathroom, locked the door for 45 seconds, came back out, handed me a phone and was like, here, it's not even working. Go ahead and look through it. And when I opened the phone, there was nothing there. Little did I know, I had found his second phone. He had gone in, swapped it, and brought me his like main original phone. And he was like, there's no contact name in there. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. You're fucking crazy. Like, literally that prime example of then me standing there and being like, am I crazy? No. I mean, I picked up the phone. I saw the girl's name. I saw the red heart. Like, that did really just happen. I feel like my ex-husband at the time was like at the beginning of his narcissistic sociopathic journey. And looking back on it, I can see ways that he was trying to, gain financial control of me and like make me stop doing certain things and mold me in a certain way. I was just not the one. Like, he needed to find someone else to do that too. Mm-hmm. But it was a prime example of how that can start to happen in a relationship, and it's terrifying.
It's so terrifying. I mean, the really malicious abusers have the intent of truly making you feel crazy. So like, we have women in our community who are like, I'll put the keys down, he'll take them and he'll hide them. And then I'll go and look for the keys and he'll be like, I don't know where you put them. I didn't touch them. Like truly sociopathic. This guy is a psycho killer kind of behaviors, right?
Right.
But generally they're trying to hide something. They're trying to avoid accountability. They just don't, they're man children. Like, they're just little babies who don't want to have the responsibility of being in an adult relationship where when you do something wrong, you own it, And so they'll do things, crazy stuff, like going in the bathroom, swapping phones, and then having the audacity to make you believe, or try to make you believe, that you imagined this girl's name on his phone. I mean, that's so narcissistic that he thought he had the capacity to make you think you imagine. I mean, what, like you dreamt it? Like, what are they thinking?
Like, I just blacked out for 2.5 seconds and like it just like appeared. And I want to be clear that I know that you and I are talking now about men doing this, but there are women that are narcissists out there and that are capable of this. We're just talking in a more generalized sense for the sake of this conversation, because this show is predominantly listened to by women, but I want to be clear that, you and I both know that it's not a gender thing. Aside from gaslighting, what are the other kind of lesser known abuse tactics that people use, that people can be aware of and wary in relationships?
So financial abuse is a huge one. We have so many, and it's interesting because when you think of financial abuse, you think of like, the Christian housewife who never leaves, who doesn't have an education, who has, her allowance, like Handmaid's Tale style. And we do see a lot of that in our community, but we also see successful, breadwinners who are, CEOs of huge corporations who have zero control over their own finances because their husbands are, gambling all the money away, keep all the credit cards in the wife's name, even though they're the ones racking up debt, but have her paycheck transferred to his account. Just crazy stuff like this, but they're always able to find some way to make it seem like she's not responsible. She's not capable. He'll take care of it. And it's said in these very covert ways, like, you're so busy, let me take care of the finances. Let me step up to the plate, and I'll take care of the money. Sometimes it's very overt. It's like, no, you don't get the money. You're the woman. Misogynistic, patriarchal, and it's not necessarily in religious families either. This is across the board. So we see a lot of financial abuse. Men sabotaging, or I guess I should say abusive people sabotaging their own careers or sabotaging their partner's careers, so that so that it's just this constant chaos, of financial stress all the time. It's like, why would you be so dumb? Like, this hurts both of us. But, yeah.
And that's what I experienced. My ex was never okay with my career. Anytime I went away to shoot a film, it was like I was on the phone with him crying. It was like a mess. And he would say, because I was starting my career as an actress at the time, and so like sometimes you're working a lot and sometimes you're not working for 4 months, so like it's either like you've got a good amount of money coming in or you have no money coming in. And there were times where he'd be like, I can take care of everything and I'll pay for all of the bills, but you have to give up acting and just be a stay-at-home housewife. And at the time I was like, that's fucking weird. Like, why would you ever suggest that you want me to give up on my dreams? Like, I don't understand. And now looking back at it with some perspective, I'm like, oh, that was the beginning of him to try and financially control me, so that when I did want to be like, fuck you, I'm leaving, I couldn't, like, because he had all the control over the money.
Yes. Yeah. It always comes down to power and control, 100%.
That's terrifying.
It is. It's very terrifying. It's really sad, because you think you're going into this relationship where it's about mutuality and partnership and working together. And for them, it's not power. Patricia Evans talks about this in her book, The Verbally Abusive Relationship, which we love at BTR. But she talks about how, healthy people have a power with dynamic. Together we'll do this with each other. But abusive people have a power over. As long as they feel like they have power over you, they feel like the relationship is working. And that's just how they think. And you can't change that. There's no amount of sex or love or money or, you could give in to every one of their demands. It wouldn't change that. They want power over you. And that's just how they think. And, we, like, so many women ask, like, I just want to understand how he thinks. And I'm like, you can't. It's like trying to learn an alien language that you can't learn, because your brain doesn't work that way. And that's a really good thing.
Right. You're like, you don't want to, and that's a good thing. So if someone finds themselves in an abusive relationship, that's not necessarily like they're being physically assaulted, how can they find the courage or know that it's okay for them to leave that situation?
Yeah, it's a hard one, because I feel like societally, we feel like we have to get to a certain level of pain before we're justified to be able to leave. It's like, is it bad enough yet? Is it bad enough yet? And a lot of times I get women saying things like, I wish he would just blank so I could leave. I wish he would just hit me. I wish he would just close off the bank account. I wish he would just, whatever. And it's like soul crushing to hear that, because it's like, I wish the harm to me would be justifiable enough. And we've learned that what is actually needed is you need to love yourself so much that any mistreatment is intolerable. So it doesn't, whether it qualifies as abuse or not, let's just throw that out the window. Create boundaries that aren't, I don't tolerate this, I don't tolerate that, but a life that is healthy. So I only allow people in my life who treat me with respect. I only spend my time around people who love me and show me that they love me, right? And I understand that, this is coming, I'm white. I grew up in a middle-class home, so I know that not everyone has the capacity to choose who they're around. And I definitely don't want to I don't want to be so naive that I don't acknowledge that, right? But as much as you're able to, practice self-care, practice compassion, invest time in yourself so that you get to a point where you love yourself so much that it just doesn't make sense to be around someone who's treating you like that, rather than seeing it this way, that's like, I just need to get to this next step, this next rung on the ladder of mistreatment so that I can leave. Because honestly, when women do that, it's never enough. he'll cheat, or it's like, well, but if he has one more affair, if he hits you, but if he puts me in the hospital, and it just escalates and escalates, and that doesn't usually get women out. What gets women out is loving themselves.
Yeah. And you're right when you say society has kind of like conditioned people to be like, well, it has to be to a certain point. My mom, this was years and years ago, had a boyfriend for a couple years, and he had moved into her house and was had his like main room in a separate room from her bedroom. And they were really happy for, a year and a half. And then things started to take a turn, and he became very verbally abusive to her. And she called the police, and she's like, I need to get this person out of my house. I don't feel safe. And the police literally were like, get him to hit you. We can't get him out of your house. They're paying rent unless he physically assaults you. Like, there's nothing we can do, which is so fucking horrible.
Yes.
To say that to a person who's like, I'm reaching out to help. So I've like, for help. I'm reaching out for help. I've gotten the balls to do that. I'm telling you, I don't feel safe in this situation, and I'm asking for assistance. But like you're saying, sorry, we can't do that unless he like full on threatens your life in a physical way.
Yeah. It's the law, the court system, all of it is so jacked up. I mean, so many women go to file restraining orders or protective orders, and it's funny because it's protective. You would think that it's going to protect you from future action, but a lot of times you won't be granted one unless something has already happened, and it's ridiculous. Yeah. And so but I think that, as much as you can, understanding that emotional and psychological abuse always precede physical battering. It doesn't mean that you're always going to be physically abused, but physical abuse never just happens out of nowhere. It always there's always emotional and psychological abuse first. So if you're already being emotionally and psychologically abused, you are far more likely to be physically abused as well. So if that's happening, you got to get to safety, and I know how hard that is. We all know how hard that is. But, whether or not the police are starting to understand more about coercive control and this kind of abuse, I do think that that's starting to happen. But, finding support from domestic violence shelters that are starting to understand, non-physical forms of violence, and communities like ours and other communities where these kinds of victims are supported, like, that's out there. Because I think that abusers oftentimes will convince victims that they need to isolate themselves because no one's going to believe them, and just pour shame over them so that they feel very isolated from the world, and so reaching out for support and help, I think, is pivotal.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned earlier setting boundaries. Can you talk to everybody a little bit about how to really understand the boundary setting and to help, or how they can help establish safety from abusive relationships that we find ourselves in?
Yeah. So, boundaries are one of those things too that just, I constantly see like posts on Instagram about them, and it's kind of frustrating because a lot of times people have the best intentions when they're setting boundaries, but it's so hard to understand. A boundary isn't a statement. It's not it's not, you can't yell at me, because that's controlling somebody else's behavior, and it just doesn't work. I mean, if you've tried that with a toddler, it doesn't work, right? It's not an ultimatum either. It's not saying, if you do this again, I'm leaving. Ultimatums have their place, but that's not a boundary. A boundary is what you do or what you believe. It's courageous actions and beliefs that you have that help to separate you from abusive and harmful behaviors. So an example of a boundary, kind of what I said earlier, I only surround myself with people who treat me with respect. So then you would be able to determine, like, what doesn't work in my life with that, and then take the steps to get there. So an example of something, we hear, so in our community, there's a lot of infidelity. So, we'll hear a woman say, well, I set a boundary that he can't talk to his affair partner. It's like, that's not a boundary, because you're still setting up the possibility of you being harmed. He can still talk to her. You're just kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop. And we don't care what he does. He's going to do what he's going to do. Like, people are going to do, and they're allowed to, like, that's their right. They can do whatever they want to do. Boundaries are about you. They're about you having the space to be your authentic, incredible self. And so, you need to be able to determine what your value system is, and then create, kind of a protective fence around that. What is going to help you to live your authentic life, and what is keeping you from doing that? If it's keeping you from doing that, then find ways to separate yourself from it.
So would you say for that specific example, like you can't say you can't talk to your affair partner, that's not a boundary. Would it be, if you talk to your affair partner again, I'm going to remove myself from this relationship?
I think that would be an ultimatum. So instead it would be, you had an affair, you talked to her recently, I'm going to live with my mom, and for the next 6 months. If during that time you have not talked to her, I will reconsider being in this relationship. But right now, I need space from you, because I can't be around someone in an intimate situation living with them if I can't trust them. So that's what I'm going to do.
Oh, that's so tough for me, because, even in my relationship now, which is like very healthy, we have what we call certain boundaries. That's like, I don't want you to get overly intoxicated, like, because it triggers me, it gets me uncomfortable. Like, that is like a line that, like, I really don't want to cross. And because he loves me and doesn't want me to be uncomfortable in that, he respects that boundary. But the way that you're explaining it sounds like an ultimatum. So how would you kind of decipher that?
It's different, because if he's respecting that, it's one thing. But if you're not waiting for the shoe to drop, right? Because there's trust established. Right. So these boundaries, more the way that I'm describing them, apply more in a situation where trust has been broken. But what you're describing really are just kind of like rules in a relationship. It's like right. I don't know. I mean, anything. Like I want to sleep on this side of the bed. Okay. I don't want you to get overly intoxicated.
Like standards, okay, and like, just, right.
Do you mesh with me? Okay, perfect. I mesh with you. Great. And so yes, those are boundaries, but they're also just kind of like values. Like, this is what I need to feel safe. Are you willing to do that? Yes. And if he did get overly intoxicated, knowing that makes you uncomfortable, knowing that bothers you, rather than saying, look, if you do that again, I'm moving out, you have the information you need. Like, and I'm not saying he's going to do that, but just in this example, you would know, like, he knew that was going to make me uncomfortable. He did it anyway. So then you have a choice. Right. Either you wait for it to happen again, or you say, you know what, I'm gonna need a little bit of time, because you knew that was going to make me uncomfortable. You did it anyway. So I'm going to go off. I'm going to spend some time by myself to figure out if I want to be in this relationship or not, because I don't know if I want to be with somebody who doesn't follow through on their word. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and we talk about all the time. It's like enforcing the boundary when it's crossed or when it's violated. Like, if there's no enforcement, then people are going to be like, okay, well, it doesn't really mean anything.
Right, exactly. And and I've heard that, the more times that you forgive, the more times that you go back, it's just kind of really reinforcing that you don't respect yourself. And so really what it comes down to is just, if a lot of times what I say to women is, if you love this person deeply and you really want to make it work with them, do it from a safe distance. Observe, if they're going to show up for you in a healthy way, they're going to make good decisions regardless of whether you live together, whether you're spending time together. If they've cheated on you, if they've been abusive to you, they obviously have a lot of work to do. So get to a safe distance where you're not being abused, and then let them work it out. But if you don't love this person, if you're staying because you feel obligated to, you have some choices to make here.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you talk to me a little bit about BTR and like what it is, and explain it to everybody and what you guys really do?
Yeah. So Anne, she's the one who does the podcast that we have. She started BTR several years ago when her ex-husband had just been arrested for domestic violence, and she was a mess. Like her earliest podcast episodes, she's like crying into the microphone. You can hear her like crunching corn in the background. Yeah, she was just a total mess. Like I don't know how she did it, but she had this vision for women who were just like steeped in trauma to be able to have online support. And this was before the pandemic, obviously. So like having, trauma-centric support groups just really wasn't something that was common at the time. And so she kind of like patched together BTR, we have a daily online support group, we have the podcast, and then we have everyone who works at BTR actually has survived domestic abuse. And so we have a bunch of coaches who are really incredible. And so it's just kind of this educational, supportive organization for victims of infidelity, betrayal, narcissistic abuse, emotional abuse. And, we try to get out as much free content as we can, because we know that not everyone has the ability to join a support group or get coaching. And so I do a lot of the free content, and then Anne does the podcast, which is also free content. And we just offer as many services as we can to help women who are in covert, abusive situations.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Can you drop the name of the podcast and where, if people want to become part of the community, where they can find you and get all of the amazing stuff you guys are putting out?
Yeah. So the podcast is the Betrayal Trauma Recovery Podcast. We're on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And then if you go to our website, it's btr.org, and you'll find everything there. We're on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, just btr.org, I think is our handle on everything. So you can find us there. We have daily content. We put out videos. Usually it's like right after I've worked out, so I'm like a sweaty mess in all of them. But but honestly, that's when I do my best thinking. So I'm like, oh, this is good. So I hope that's, I don't know. I hope it doesn't offend too many people that I'm like in every video, but whatever. And so if you're interested in joining our community, you can always, everything is there on the website. You can email us. My email is jane@btr.org. I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has. So yeah, that's what we offer.
Amazing. And once people are out of the situations and have removed themselves from the abuse, what is the things that you have found most helpful on the road to recovery for people?
Yeah. I mean, it's really hard because when you're in that relationship, you're managing the abuser, and you're trying so hard to establish safety with someone who refuses to give it to you. So it's like your whole life is wrapped around this person who has kind of forced himself to be at the center of your universe. And so it's just gone, and you're like, what do I do? And in that time, the things that are super important are self-care. And I'm not just talking like, the fun self-care, like bubble baths and manicures, like those things are so awesome. But I'm talking like nutrition, just trying to eat as often as your body permits, because trauma can make it super hard to eat, eating, staying hydrated, sleeping, walking, stretching, breathing, just taking care of your body, because trauma it's in our bodies, So self-care 100%, finding a support network, which can be really hard post-COVID with all of this, but there's so many, like your podcast is incredible. Your content is great. There's so much online support. Yeah. And I think that can really help people who don't have, family nearby or actual physical friendships. So finding support is super important. And then just taking the time to invest in you, in rediscovering the ability to feel joy again, and I think that just slow steps. If you can't feel it, like for a long time, I couldn't like taste chocolate. Like it was really weird, but like I would try to eat it.
That's devastating.
Yeah, it was devastating. I was like, I hate him. Like I can't taste chocolate. And it was so frustrating because I was like, I felt like life had lost its meaning, kind of,
Right? You're like, now I'm just having the calories and not even any of the fucking
It
payoff.
was horrible. But it took time, and eventually I could taste it again. And it was like this glorious experience. And I was like, this is such a good life lesson. Just keep trying, keep putting the time in, and eventually it slowly comes back. So I think just a lot of compassion for yourself, a lot of patience, and, and it comes back.
Yeah, I was going to say, and giving yourself grace during all of those steps, because so many of us, me especially, want to be like, okay, I'm out of the relationship, I've done the divorce, and now I want to be fixed and healed. So like, let's fucking do it. And it doesn't always come right away. And you have to give yourself grace during that healing period.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, I mean, just because you can't see the scars, many women haven't been battered to the point that they're never going to, we don't have broken bones. We don't look all that different, but the trauma that's left from gaslighting, infidelity, it is deep, and it takes a while to start feeling good again. It just does.
Yeah.
So that's,
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my God, Jane, this has been so wonderful. Can you one more time drop the Instagram handle for BTR so people can come explore your guys' community?
Yeah, definitely. Betrayal Trauma Recovery on Instagram.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here and sharing all your knowledge. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, I want to thank Jane so much for all of that incredible insight. I hope that you guys, if you are in need of abuse recovery, mental, physical, emotional, any of it, you go check out Betrayal Trauma Recovery and see if they have anything that can assist you on your healing journey, and make sure you are giving yourself enough of that self-love. All right, we are going to take a turn now and check out one of your FML stories. Here we go.
Hey Gabrielle, my name's Lindsay and here's my FML story. When I was 19, I got an awesome job in accounting shortly after I graduated college. I worked in a small office with just myself and another lady, so naturally, with spending so much time together, we became super close. We were practically inseparable for the better part of 4 years. Like her kids were part of my wedding. In 2013, the place we were working for did some reorganization and she ended up leaving. Fast forward a couple months, I start to notice some weird money situations. I dig into it a little further to notice that there's actually money missing. Like bank deposits were dropped off at our office, but never actually made it into the bank account. So I had to report it to my boss. Of course, not mentioning anything to my friend because it looked awfully fishy. Upon further investigation, it turned out that the woman I thought was my best friend was just using naive 19-year-old me to gain access to my username and password for our system so she could embezzle money. Talk about awkward and heartbreaking. My employer had to write me up because I shared information I shouldn't have shared. I had to be questioned by the police to make sure I had nothing to do with the fraud and theft, which I 100% didn't know anything about. It all resulted in finding out she had stole over $134,000, having to go through the long drawn-out court process, and her doing about a year in jail. Needless to say, we aren't friends anymore. There's definitely more to the story, but that's the Cliff Notes. Fuck my life, am I right? Thanks for listening.
Oh my God. I can't imagine going through that at 19. Like, I was so not even a fully formed human at 19. That's fucking insane, dude. I mean, first red flag of this woman to like befriend you in such a best friend way when you were that young, I would say. But that's a lot of fucking money to be stealing from a company, dude. Wow. And I'm so sorry that you had to be written up for coming forward and telling the truth about it. That is freaking wild, girl. And I am glad to hear that you are not friends with her and cut that shit off. As always, make sure you guys are subscribed so you never miss an episode. Keep up with us on Instagram at FML Talk Podcast. If you want to watch the episodes live in studio, you can go to youtube.com/FML Talk. And as always, have a self-love cocktail on me. Cheers.